It's Dr. Vibe here, your host of the monthly Google Hangouts for premium members on Google Plus, Google Hangouts, whatever you want to call it. And as always, I like to say you're blessed and highly favored. You're a magnet for miracles and your solution for someone's problem. Our guest this month is Dr. Carl Hart. And Dr. Hart's going to be sharing with us and giving some insight about men, drug addiction, and self-discovery. So we're very happy to have him on our show tonight, and also one of the premium members of the Good Men Project. Edmund Ajapon is with us also to contribute to the conversation. But first, we'd like to say thank you very much, Dr. Hart. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Happy to be here, man. I came for the sayings. What did you say? You a solution to somebody's problems? Right on.
Okay, well, I think you're going to be the solution to some problems tonight, too, or some challenges tonight. So before we get started, can you just share a little bit of background about yourself?
Well, as you pointed out, I'm Carl Hart. I'm a tenured professor at Columbia University. Before becoming a professor at Columbia, did 3 postdocs, University of California, San Francisco, Yale, and Columbia. Before that, PhD in neuroscience at the University of Wyoming in Laramie, Wyoming. Before that, finished my BA at the University of Maryland, but mainly did that while I was in the Air Force. So I spent 4 years in the Air Force, all overseas, in Japan and in England. And the Air Force allowed me to go and get an undergraduate degree. Before that, I was hanging out in the hood in Miami and thought I was going to be one of those NBA basketball stars, and we know how that turned out.
Well, I guess if you're a Miami basketball star, not too good these days. So we'll leave it at that. And Edmund, can you share a little background about yourself?
Sure. My name is Edmund Ajapon. I am a graduate student at Columbia University Teachers College. I'm a science educator, and my research focuses on Black youth and their engagement in science education. Excellent.
Dr. Hart, we're going to get right into the discussion tonight, and Edmund's also, you're free to contribute, and also anyone who's tweeting, certainly tweet your questions and comments to at the Good Men Project. So, before we go any further, Dr. Hart, how serious in today's society, and I'm emphasizing today's society, is the issue of men and drugs?
How serious is the issue? I don't even know how to answer that question. I don't know. The issue, think about it this way. How serious is the issue of men and driving automobiles? Or how serious is the issue of men and alcohol? It's about the same seriousness. And so when we think about drugs, drugs themselves are not so much the problem. It's the sort of hysteria that's around the drugs that become the problem. And that becomes a problem for certain groups in our society. And in the U.S. and North America, it's typically the despised and minority groups.
Edmund, you want to contribute? I can keep on going, but I want you to make sure that you're part of the show too.
No, you keep going. I'll jump in.
Okay, no problem. When you're saying specific groups, are there specific male groups that are more challenged by the issue of drugs than other demographic male groups?
Well, you know, I study drugs, and so one of the things that that has troubled me, and one of the things that have been my interests, have been primarily Black boys and men as they relate to drugs, but not so much drug use, but it's the consequences of drugs, and that is the criminal justice system. In our country, in the U.S., we have had this intense focus on eliminating drugs from our society, which, by the way, is ridiculous, a ridiculous sort of notion that one can eliminate drugs from a society. Drugs have always been here. Drugs will always be here. But nonetheless, in the United States, we've had this intense focus on eliminating these drugs at all costs to certain people in the society. And those people who pay the price primarily are Black men and boys. And so that's been my major focus. Like, why are we, for example, arresting so many Black boys and men for drugs? Now, if it's true that drugs are so dangerous that we should go after them with such intensity, all right, I can understand that. In fact, that's how I got in this business about 25 years ago. I thought that I was going to solve the drug addiction problem in the community, in the Black community, in the hood, if you will. And that's why I started studying drugs. But then it turns out that drugs are not as dangerous as people have made them out to be. Now, this is not to say that drugs aren't particularly dangerous, because they are, just like driving an automobile, just like having unprotected sex. There's potential dangers. But I'm saying that the dangers associated with drugs have been exaggerated. And they've been exaggerated to the point that certain groups paid a price for that exaggeration, and that exaggeration is intense law enforcement aimed at certain communities. To the point where now we have 1 in 3 black males born today will probably spend time in jail, largely driven by this sort of focus on eliminating drugs from a society.
So are you saying that the justice system in society is a bigger issue than the drugs itself? I just want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that the criminal justice system, and by the way, the term criminal justice is a joke. It should probably be criminal injustice. I mean, particularly for some groups, that's more of a problem for the community that I care about than the drugs themselves. Let me just tell you, I've been given drugs and studying drugs for about 25 years, and one of the most important lessons that I have learned with drugs is this. Drug effects are predictable. That means that as you increase the dose, you also increase the effects and also the potential for toxicity. That's predictable. So when you hear people say that some drug produces unpredictable effects, that's a license for you to stop listening, because that person thinks that you're an idiot or they are an idiot. Because it doesn't work like that. The drug effects are predictable. Now, when we think about law enforcement's interaction with black boys, especially black boys and men, those interactions are not predictable. Too often, the black boy or man involved ends up dead. I mean, you can think about, in the Bronx, for example, a few years ago, we had a kid named Ramali Graham who was killed by the police who thought he had marijuana. We could think about even George Zimmerman, who wasn't law enforcement, but he was local security. He thought that Trayvon Martin was intoxicated on something. So when you think about the sort of scapegoating of the drugs, and it allows people to, particularly law enforcement and security personnel, to engage in extremely aggressive behaviors against black boys and men, behaviors that are, it's unpredictable, these interactions, and the outcomes for black boys and men are oftentimes not good. But drug effects are predictable. And so when you ask the question about which has been the worst, it's easy for me. I know how to keep my sons, I have 3 of them, and I know how to keep them safe with drugs. I would much prefer them interact with drugs than law enforcement.
Great insight. Edmund, anything as of yet?
No, he's absolutely right, man. I agree with you 100%. When you think of our justice system, I've worked in our justice system for a little bit. I used to teach at a juvenile detention center here in the Bronx, and when I just having one-on-one conversation with students, a lot of them were in there for petty drug infractions, marijuana, cocaine, or distribution, whatever, what have you. But when you think about asking the stories about how they got into the system and how they got locked up, there was some gruesome stories, really bad stories. And, also, you could look into the stop and frisk, the stop and frisk process that's been enacted in New York. And I've been stopped and frisked. And I don't know what they were looking for particularly, but in my neighborhood, I live in a predominantly black and urban neighborhood, and I see it happen very often. So you're absolutely right in terms of the law enforcement in our community. We can never really predict their actions, and it's unfortunate. I'm sure it has large psychological effects on our community.
Dr. Hart, what are some of the effects that you've seen in your 25 years that the justice system and drugs have had on black men in general? What have you seen as some of the far-reaching effects? Some of them we may know. What are some of the ones we may not know about?
Well, with the major effects, and when I think about the criminal justice system as it relates to drugs and black boys and men, when you think about, for example, at the federal level, how many people we arrest for offenses of crack cocaine offenses, which are punished more harshly than powder cocaine offenses. When you think about that, 80% of the people who've been prosecuted under those laws, those harsh laws, have been black. even though the majority of the cocaine users, crack or any form of cocaine, are white. And when we think about this fact that men, for example, make up 93% of the people in prison, so we're really talking about black boys and men. That's who we're really talking about. The same is true when we start to look at arrests for marijuana. Black boys and men are 2 to 8 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana than their white counterparts, even though they smoke marijuana at the same rate. So when you start to go across drugs and you start to see how our society enforces drug laws, you start to see these accumulating effects. And so you ask the question like, well, why are black people in general twice as likely to be unemployed than white people? Well, in part because if you have a criminal record like what I'm describing, you decrease the likelihood of getting a job. You decrease the likelihood of participating in mainstream society. You decrease the likelihood of you taking care of your family or having a family or being plugged into the society. It's not rocket science. It's quite simple. But the society pretends that it's more complicated than it is. It's not.
Edmund, anything?
Well, that's powerful, but if you don't mind, I want to ask Dr. Hart a quick question. What about, in comparison to black and African American young men, what about Latino young men as well? Is it the same? Are we looking at the same things, or are there stats different?
Well, when we think about Latino men, certainly, particularly as we think about New York City, for example, Latino men are kind of put into this mix as well. They also are catching hell in many respects, but the thing about the Latino men that complicates it a little bit is that, remember, Hispanic and Latino is an ethnic sort of a group, not a race.
Right.
Now, so you have black Latino men too, black Hispanic men, and so that complicates it because the sort of the white Spanish Cubans in Miami, for example, are not the same as the Puerto Ricans and Dominicans in New York City in terms of their interaction with the criminal justice system. So, and they're not the same as the Mexicans in California. So you have to be very careful in who you're talking about. And we also have, for example, white Colombians who come from the country of Colombia here, and they can sometimes assimilate a lot more readily than the Dominican brothers. And so we have to be careful how we lump everybody into this group because they're not the same. They're not seen the same.
Okay.
We've spoken mainly about black men, and now Edmund has brought up Latino American men. Is obviously from statistics the drug issue is not as big a challenge with white men, but is it still an issue in white men, for white men also?
Oh, in this country, when we think about drugs, first of all, drugs are used in all sort of areas of our society. Everybody's getting high. Well, that's an overstatement, but every racial group participates in drug use. So so drugs is an issue for everybody in the society. But the extent to which drugs are an issue varies depending on who you are in the society. And certainly in America, we got so hyper about our incarceration of people. We certainly have a lot of white people in prison now as well, but the numbers are not as disproportionate like they are with black folks. Like, for example, black men make up 6% of the general population, but they make up 35% of the prison population. So you don't have this sort of disproportionate number of white men in jail like black men, but they certainly are going to jail, and some of them for drug-related charges. When you think about methamphetamine throughout the country, methamphetamine is associated with poor white folks in places like Missouri or Oklahoma, and is also associated with the gay communities. Not that they're the only communities that use methamphetamine, but that's who we kind of associate the drug with. And many of them, yeah, they are going to jail for methamphetamine.
What role, good, bad, or ugly, does the media have in this, with this subject and this issue, in your opinion?
Well, you said what role does the media have? It's largely bad. When I think about this, the media, not only the media, I don't want to. I mean, just like when we think of the media, at least I think about the news media and that sort of stuff. But we have to also think about Hollywood. We have to think about hip hop. We have to think about all forms of entertainment throughout our society. They all perpetuate horrible stereotypes about drugs. You name it. New Jack City, one of my favorite films, just perpetuated all types of myths about crack cocaine. Although the sort of makers of the film, I'm sure they thought they were doing a community service, but what they end up doing is fueling the fire and perpetuating stereotypes that are just not true about that drug. So the media participates in that because the media, it sells newspapers. It gets people to watch their news broadcasts. Nobody wants to hear about somebody who smoked cocaine on Saturday night and had a good time and went to work on Monday. Nobody wants to hear about somebody who's used heroin and then on Friday and then they had a good weekend and then went to work on Monday and took care of their family. That's not interesting. What you want to hear is that, oh my God, this person smoked so much crack that the only thing they want to do is smoke crack. But that is such a small minority of crack users, but it becomes what people see as the reality of crack users. Most crack users don't do that. But most people, for example, don't know that the current guy in the White House, Barack Obama, used marijuana, did cocaine when he was a younger man. He went on to become president. You know, this is not to besmirch his reputation. This is just to show that that's the rule, not the exception. Most people who do cocaine are like that. They don't become president, but they go and handle their responsibilities and take care of their business, their family, and so forth. But when you think about the media in that regard, who wants to tell that story? That's not sexy.
Edmund, anything you want to add on?
Well, I'm in awe. I absolutely agree, man. I think that the media definitely there's that stigma in the media that, you know, people of color, especially in the African American community, that, you know, we like to indulge in narcotics and in drugs and abuse drugs, and that's a story that, you know, the viewers like to hear. That's absolutely right, and that changes the viewer's perspective on people of color. And then we have people like George Zimmerman that act the way they do in terms of the defense mechanism and the way that they treat people of color.
Just before we go further, I'd like to thank people who are tweeting and retweeting about our conversation tonight. Keep it up. Really appreciate it. Don't take it for granted. So, Dr. Hart, you've done this for 25 years. And I'm saying, is the situation getting better, worse, staying the same? And I guess you can speak about it with black men, but when we talk about men and drugs over the time that you've spent committed to this issue, what have you seen get better, get worse, or stay the same?
Well, I think, you know, in many respects, I'm encouraged because you might recall those commercials that showed, like, the frying pan and the egg. This is your brain on drugs. And this is, do you recall that education that they gave us? They called that education. Do you remember that?
Yes. Well, I guess you're being sarcastic because you have so many.
I really am. But the point is that the young brothers today, you do that to them, they will laugh in your face. They know that that's a joke. And whereas in my generation, when we were saying those things, some people actually believe that rubbish as real education. So at some level, the intellectual tone surrounding drugs has dramatically increased, particularly now in North America. We're in a new moment. So I'm very encouraged by that. But one of the things that I would just caution people against is that we just can't become complacent. Sometimes people think that progress is linear. You made this step, you got to make that step. It's not how it works. You know, you go have these peaks and valleys, and you have to continually fight these battles over and over and re-educate people over and over. The thing is that poor people, especially poor people, have to understand that as we get intense or crazy about some activity in society and pass these laws, it's the poor people who are going to pay the price, not wealthy people, because they are insulated with resources, lawyers, and so forth. And so poor people have to understand this when we're talking about passing new stricter gun laws in places like Chicago and these kind of places, it's going to be poor people who pay the price. These same sorts of things happen with drug laws in the 80s. And we see this movie over and over. So we're going to need these young people to continue to fight these same battles. And they can't fall for the okie doke, as they say.
Edmund, anything you want to add on to?
No, I agree. I agree.
Good stuff. Is there the approach that we take with men and drugs? Is it a different approach depending with demographics and race, or should there be, in your opinion, a policy that we have addressing drugs and men uniformly, or does it have to be approached differently by race and age when it comes to men?
So I'm a scientist, right?
Yep.
What the politically correct thing would be to say, oh, we should have this universal approach. That's stupid. But that's what people would say. As a scientist, you look and you see where the problems are, and you have your intervention targeted where the problem is. When I started out the conversation, I said that 1 in 3 black men or boys born today can expect to go to jail. That same number for white guys is 1 in 20. So why in the hell would you treat each of them equally? That's stupid. You should have interventions aimed, targeted for where the real problems are.
And what do you feel is, why is there, in your opinion, a lack of action?
I don't know if there is a lack of action. I don't know if that's, I think there are people that are out there trying, they are, their heart's in the right place, they're working hard, but the thing is that people just have to make sure they step back, and it's good that your heart's in the right place, but you have to be smart about these things. You have to look at the evidence, and you have to see where the evidence dictate your position go. And so just like you just said, should we have this universal approach? There are a number of people out there with good hearts who would say yes, but they're not looking at the evidence, and they should let the evidence guide or dictate their behavior, where their actions are. And so I don't think people are being inactive. I just think that we might do a better job of being smart about what we're doing. That's why I wrote my book, High Price, as a blueprint for people to kind of take and see where we can make a real difference, especially among black boys and men.
I guess we haven't talked, you've talked a little bit about the justice system. What do you see, or suggestions you make for families with men who are going through the challenge of drugs? What suggestions do you have for them, and what approaches can they use to overcome this issue?
Yeah, so the first thing that people have to understand when they have a family member with a drug problem, the first and most important thing is to have a careful, good assessment. That means that they have to understand what's really driving the drug addiction problem. Too often in many of these treatment programs, they have this sort of one shoe fits all. That's not how it works. People are addicted to drugs for a variety of reasons. But one of the things I want to say here right now is that about 80 to 90% of the people who use drugs are not addicts. They don't need treatment. They're handling their responsibility. But that 10 to 20% who are addicted, the first thing they need is a careful assessment of why they are addicted. People are addicted for a variety of reasons, ranging from co-occurring psychiatric illnesses like anxiety disorders, depression or mood disorders, psychotic disorders like schizophrenia, a wide range of reasons people become addicted for drugs, trying to treat their psychiatric illnesses in some cases. In other cases, people have a limited number of better options, and the drug sort of behavior is one of the better options that they have. And if that's the case, a different treatment will be required than the person who has a co-occurring psychiatric illness. Addiction also is about, when we think about the sort of list of symptoms, it's really about people not having the ability to temper their behavior in a variety of domains. And so some people just haven't learned the responsibility skills. And so those people will require a different sort of treatment approach. So it's critically important for the family to make sure that their loved one gets a really good assessment, and they should really, really attend to what's going on with the person's treatment. That's the first thing. If the treatment provider is not talking about this assessment like this, well, you probably won't get the best treatment.
Edmund, anything you want to add on it?
No.
Okay, no problem. So, as Dr. Hart, you sound like you're getting you shared in our conversation that you're feeling optimistic, that you're seeing some light. What can you give some reasons why you're feeling optimistic about this being overcome with men and drugs?
Yeah, I'm optimistic because, you know, I travel the world now a lot as a result of the book, and I recently came from Brazil. Some people might know that Brazil is really a black country. They have about 50% of the population is African, right? And so, but when you look at the African population, they're not participating in mainstream. When you see pictures from Brazil, you don't see many Africans, but they make up 50% of the population. One of the things that's happening in a place like Brazil now is that they think crack problem. I was there, as I said, recently, and saying what our experience was here in the United States, where we said that we had a crack problem. We really didn't have a crack problem. We had a poverty problem. We had an unemployment problem. We had those sorts of things. And this message was really heard in Brazil to the point that every time I spoke in Brazil, I had hundreds of people coming out. It was a great sort of visit. I met with government officials, and they heard this message too. The message was, don't scapegoat drugs in order not to deal with your social problems, your economic problems, and scapegoating a community in the process. And so they're hearing this message, and I think they're hearing this message around the world, that you can no longer blame drugs for society's ills. You can no longer blame drugs to go after certain groups in your society. I think that message is being heard loud and clear around the world now. Whereas before, certainly in the mid-'80s in the United States, that message was not heard.
Are the situations and reasons for men using drugs changed over the time that you've looked at this issue?
Nope. People have gotten high since time began, and they will always get high for similar reasons. They get high in order to enhance human functioning, to chill, relax, a wide variety of reasons. Our job is to help keep people safe.
Okay, good stuff. Edmund, anything you want to add on that?
So essentially you're just saying that drugs aren't the problem, you know, the social issues are the problem, our law enforcement, etc. These reasons why people indulge in drugs, that's the main problem that we need to focus on.
That's exactly right. That's the main problem. Not to say that people can't get in trouble with drugs, because some people will. They'll get in trouble with drugs, they'll get in trouble with driving and those things, but you're absolutely right. Drugs are not the main problem.
Gotcha.
So what suggestions do you have, because you're so concerned about the way the criminal justice system in America is handling this issue, what suggestions do you have for the criminal justice system to help this issue, not cause more hurt to this issue?
Yep. So in the last chapter of my book, High Price, I delineated this clearly. I think we should decriminalize all drug possession charges, just like they have done in Portugal, in the Czech Republic, where their drug using rates and incarceration rates, all those sorts of things are a lot lower than ours in the United States, and they're even lower than many of their European neighbors. Now, that's what I suggest. But people say, well, what's the difference between decriminalization and legalization? Legalization is what we do with alcohol and tobacco. You can buy it, sell it without fear of criminal prosecution. Whereas decriminalization is like treating drug possession offenses just like we treat traffic violations. That is, one might get a fine or not. Maybe they don't get fined, but they don't get a criminal record. You no longer put this blemish on their record and prevent them from possibly getting employment.
What do you feel is take for the criminal justice system to get to that point? Because obviously they're not there yet. What do you feel it's going to take to get to that point?
Well, it's not going to come from the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system are invested in this because they make a lot of money out of this. I mean, if you're talking about going to people's pockets, you can forget about that. We need the people to actually push for this. That's why I wrote the book, to educate the population so they could see what's really going on. And they need to push their lawmakers, the people who they voted for. When that happens, and I think it is starting to happen, people are no longer falling for the okie doke as they once did. Once that happens and they put pressure on their politicians, and I think that's where we get real movement. But please understand, law enforcement or the criminal justice system, even treatment providers, all of these people are invested in keeping the model exactly the same way it is, because that's how they make their money.
Edmund, anything you want to add?
No.
Okay. Well, before we let you go, Dr. Hart, and thank you so much for sharing some time with us on the monthly Google Plus Hangout for GMP Premium members, I'd like to ask a question and maybe give 3 parts of it. So what is your message for A, men who aren't taking drugs, in regard to encouraging to stay away from them, then men who are having an issue with drugs, and then to those outside of that circle, you know, the families, the country, society, on dealing with this issue. So first, about why men should not get involved in drug culture.
Well, you know, so as I pointed out, I have 3 boys, and that is not what I talk to them about. If you're talking like focused on drugs, you probably lost the battle. What I talk to my kids about is making a contribution to this society. How do you improve the lives or help improve the lives of people without a voice, poor people? Now that's number 1. And then and I have a 13-year-old, a 19-year-old, and a 31-year-old. So at all those different levels, the major thing is that you do well, for example, in school. And then that gives you an opportunity to actually contribute to the society and help those people who we care about, the people who don't have a voice. That's number 1. I don't really care if you are engaging in these other things, driving your car too fast, but anything that disrupts your ability to make a contribution to the society, to the lives of poor people and voiceless people, now we have a problem. So the major focus should be reinforcing these long-term goals, not so much don't do this or don't do that. That's not where the focus should be. If that's where the focus is, you have probably lost the battle, or you probably are not raising boys who are going to do important things in the society. Now, for the people who actually have a drug problem or they have issues with drugs, number 1, make sure that they can get a good assessment. Make sure they get help. Make sure they learn much as possible about the activity in which they are engaged. Don't be stupid about any activity that you're engaged in. So seek help, but also read yourself so you'll have some ability to be able to evaluate the type of help that you're getting. I mean, again, High Price. Start with High Price, the book. That'll help you. That'll help people out tremendously. Now, when you talk about the larger society, what can we do for the larger society, or what the larger society can do? I mean, that's a difficult question, what the larger society should do. I mean, I talked about we should decriminalize drugs. I've already talked about that. And I also talk about how we need to have more realistic education about drugs, and not this hysteria, not this sort of preachy, sanctimonious sort of thing. How can we keep people safe? We know, for example, most of the people who die from a heroin-related death do so because they combine heroin with another sedative. That's an easy public health message. If you're going to do heroin, don't combine it with another sedative like alcohol or benzodiazepine. Easy. Society can do this. So society can get these laws changed, and they can also start by using realistic education.
Good closing thoughts. Well, Dr. Hart, I'd like to thank you for sharing with us on the monthly premium members Google Hangout at the Good Men Project. Before we let you go, how can people connect with you? You did mention about your book. Certainly would like you to promote that while you're on the air with us. So go ahead.
Yeah, you can connect with me by going to Dr. Carl Hart. That's my Twitter handle, Dr. Carl Hart Twitter handle. That's also my website. You can check out all the stuff that I've been doing, and you can send me messages. Hit me up. Looking forward to hearing from you, particularly this crowd. That's why I'm out here. I'm out here to serve this community, this crowd.
And Edmund, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Do you have any closing thoughts, and also how can people connect with you?
No, I'm thankful for the opportunity to be in on this conversation, Dr. Carl Hart. Great contribution to the community, I think. And people can contact me on Twitter at King Adjupon, which is on my lower third. But I'm really happy that I was here for this. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Well, we're very happy to have both of you on the conversation tonight. It is Dr. Vibe here. I'm your host of the monthly Google Hangouts at the Good Men Project, and we have them every month. Certainly for the premium members especially, you can join in the conversation like Edmund did live tonight. And as always, we like to say, at the Good Men Project, we're having conversations that no one else is having. So remember, you're blessed and highly favored. You're a magnet for miracles, and you're a solution for someone's problem. We will see you next month. Take care. Bye-bye.